The galaxy had long been divided. Once a shining beacon of cooperation, the Galactic Coalition now lay in tatters. Years of brutal conflict between its members had fractured alliances, turned friends into enemies, and left entire star systems ravaged. Earth, however, had remained resilient. Though its colonies had suffered, humanity's unity and strength allowed it to endure. But Earth was not alone in this struggle. The galaxy had watched as the Black Tide, a ruthless, unknown force, swept across star systems, leaving devastation in its wake. The Coalition's inability to stand firm against this growing threat had caused widespread despair, and now it was humanity's turn to act. In the midst of this turmoil, the United Nations, backed by Earth's military, had made a bold decision to forge a new alliance, not just to combat the Black Tide, but to restore balance to a galaxy teetering on the edge of collapse. Ambassador Rael Juno, a seasoned diplomat known for her unyielding determination, had been appointed to lead this crucial mission. With her deep knowledge of intergalactic politics and her reputation for achieving the impossible, Rael was humanity's greatest hope. As the ambassador's ship, the Liberty's Hope, entered orbit around the desolate world of Seldris, a former hub of the Galactic Coalition, Rael stood at the helm, her gaze focused on the meeting that awaited her. It would be no ordinary summit. Earth had invited the leaders of several key species, all of whom had their own agendas and doubts about humanity's ability to lead the galaxy into peace. The Adrosians, a species known for their cunning and diplomacy, had already made it clear they would not bend to Earth's will. The Koroth, a race of hyper-intelligent beings who prized knowledge above all else, viewed Earth's rise to power as a threat to their own superiority. And then there were the Myrians, fierce warriors who had never forgotten humanity's involvement in a long-forgotten war. The atmosphere aboard the Liberty's Hope was tense as Rael and her team gathered in the war room, a sleek chamber with walls that flickered with holographic projections of the galaxy. The gathered leaders of Earth's military and diplomatic corps shared a quiet, solemn understanding of what was at stake. The negotiations ahead would determine the fate of more than just Earth. It would decide the future of the galaxy. Rael addressed her team, her voice steady yet filled with urgency. We must be the unifying force. The Black Tide is growing, and they will stop at nothing to destroy what remains of the Coalition. If we fail to forge these bonds now, all is lost. We are not just representing Earth, we are the last hope of the galaxy. Her words hung in the air like a weight, but she saw the determination in the eyes of those around her. The stakes had never been higher. The summit began the moment the Liberty's Hope touched down on Seldris, its atmosphere filled with tension and anticipation. The first to step forward were the Adrosian delegates, elegant but cold, their long silver hair flowing like liquid metal. Their leader, Prime Minister Talon, was a figure known for his sharp intellect and razor-thin diplomacy. He gave a stiff nod as he entered, his eyes scanning the room with a quiet scrutiny. "We are here, Earth," Talon said, his voice rich and commanding, "but do not mistake this for trust. You have much to prove before we consider aligning ourselves with your ambitions." Rael met his gaze unwaveringly. "We're not here to force alliances, Prime Minister. We're here to forge them." Just as the meeting began, the alarms blared. The comms officer's voice crackled through the room. "Ambassador Juno, we have reports of an attack on Earth's mining colonies in the Arcanus system. The Black Tide has arrived." Rael's heart pounded. Her fears had come true. The summit was already being tested, and it seemed the galaxy's newest hope was about to be snuffed out before it had even begun. "Prepare for immediate action," Rael commanded, her voice cold with resolve. "This meeting is no longer just about politics. It's about survival." In that moment, all pretense of diplomacy fell away. The fragile alliance she sought to build would be tested in blood. The fate of Earth and the galaxy hung in the balance. The Liberty's Hope shot through the void of space, its engines roaring as it diverted course toward the Arcanus system. Rail Juno stood before the tactical display, her mind racing. The Black Tide had chosen their target carefully: Earth's mining colonies, the lifeblood of its economy and military infrastructure. Without them, Earth would be crippled. The attack wasn't just a military strike, it was a statement. Status report. Rail barked as she turned to the communications officer, her voice cutting through the panic that gripped the room. Multiple unidentified ships have breached the outer defense perimeter of Arcanus, the officer replied. We've lost contact with all colonies in the system. Initial reports suggest heavy casualties. The Black Tide has deployed ground forces. Rail clenched her fists. The Black Tide wasn't just an enemy force. They were an unstoppable tidal wave of destruction, known for their overwhelming numbers and terrifying tactics. If they weren't stopped here, Earth would lose a critical foothold in the galaxy. Get us into the fight, she ordered, turning to her fleet commander, Admiral Oren. Full speed ahead, we need to neutralize those forces before they breach the colonies. Admiral Oren nodded, his face grim. Aye, ma'am, engaging now. The Liberty's hope tore through the stars, and within moments Earth's fleet emerged from the darkness of space, reinforced by several allied ships, though Rail could see the hesitation in their faces. Some of the species attending the summit had volunteered their ships to aid the defense, but not all of them seemed eager to commit to Earth's cause. The fleet was still far from united. As they arrived in orbit above Arcanus, the reality of the situation became clear. The Black Tide ships, sleek, jagged vessels covered in ominous, dark plating, flooded the system, forming an imposing blockade. Rail's heart tightened. The enemy ships were unlike any Earth had encountered before. They seemed to move as a singular force with devastating efficiency. We've got incoming, shouted Lieutenant Tessa, the young officer at the helm. They're launching attack waves. Rail gritted her teeth and turned to the holoscreen. The enemy was closing in fast, and Earth's fleet was outnumbered. But they had something the Black Tide didn't: humanity's indomitable will. Engage evasive maneuvers. Target their lead ships with everything we've got, Rail ordered, and get me a direct line to our allies. A tense silence filled the bridge as the battle raged. The ships of Earth and its allies dove in and out of fire, dodging blasts from the Black Tide as they returned fire with pinpoint accuracy. Rail's hands gripped the armrests of her chair as the fleet's guns roared, and the shields of the Liberty's Hope absorbed a punishing hit. Then, an unexpected voice crackled over the comms, sharp and filled with authority. It was Talon, the Edrosian leader. Ambassador Juno, we are committing our forces to this fight. You will not face the Black Tide alone, he said, his voice unyielding. But understand this, victory will demand total cooperation. If you are to lead this alliance, you must prove Earth is capable of leading in battle as well as diplomacy. Rail's heart skipped a beat. The Edrosians were notoriously cautious and self-interested, but their decision to commit to the fight was a huge step. She didn't have time to think about politics now. She had a battle to win. We will not fail, she said, meeting the eyes of her officers. All ships, concentrate fire on their command vessel. We take them down, we win this fight. The Liberty's Hope and the rest of the fleet moved as one, targeting the heart of the Black Tide's formation. With coordinated strikes, the Alliance's ships unleashed a devastating barrage, punching through the Black Tide's defenses. The Black Tide fleet began to fracture, and the command vessel, a massive ship coated in black spikes, was left vulnerable. Just as victory seemed within reach, a new threat emerged. A monstrous warship, far larger than anything seen before, emerged from the darkness behind the Black Tide's ranks. It was a ship of pure devastation, and it was heading directly toward Earth's fleet. The bridge fell into stunned silence. The sheer size of the enemy ship was terrifying, dwarfing even Earth's most formidable warships. Rail's mind raced. All ships, concentrate fire on that warship. We cannot let it through. The battle intensified, but as Rail watched the screen, she knew that victory would come at a price. Humanity's first real test was unfolding before her eyes, and failure was not an option. The Black Tide might be relentless, but so was Earth. But as the warship's weapons powered up, Rail knew this was only the beginning. The galaxy was watching, and what happened next would determine if the Eternal Alliance could survive, or if it would shatter before it had even begun. "Hold the line," Rail whispered, her voice steely with resolve. "This is just the beginning." The battle for Arcanus was far from over. The Liberty's hope lurched as another series of blasts rocked the hull. Rail Juno barely maintained her footing as the ship bucked under the pressure, her heart pounding with the urgency of the situation. The battle above Arcanus had taken an unexpected turn. Earth's fleet had made significant headway, but the appearance of the massive Black Tide warship had turned the tide in their favor, or so it seemed. Rail wasn't so sure. "Status report," she called, her voice sharp and commanding. "Shields holding at 60%, Lieutenant Tessa reported quickly. "We've knocked out most of their smaller ships, but that warship is still intact and advancing. We can't seem to get through their armor. It's unlike anything we've ever seen before." Rail's eyes narrowed. She had fought in many battles, but this was different. There was something about the Black Tide that felt more coordinated, more deliberate. Their sudden retreat from the fight had been suspicious, and Rail couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't acting alone. "Open a channel to Admiral Orin," she ordered. Moments later, the Admiral's face appeared on the comm screen, his expression grim. "Rail, we've got a problem. That warship isn't just another vessel, it's a command ship, and I'm certain it's been equipped with something far beyond the Black Tide's usual arsenal. We need to take it down before they use whatever weapon they're preparing." Rail nodded, steeling herself. "Agreed, but I've got a feeling this isn't just the Black Tide's doing. I think someone else is pulling the strings." Orin's brow furrowed. "What are you suggesting?" Rail took a deep breath, then turned to the tactical officer. "Set a course for the warship's command center. We're going to board it and disable its weapon systems." Rail's mind was racing. The Black Tide had always been unpredictable, but this level of coordination, this level of technology, it didn't fit. The warship wasn't a mere battle cruiser. It had been designed for a singular purpose, to crush entire fleets. And there was only one force in the galaxy that could provide such technology, the Zhyrith. The Zhyrith were a race that had been lost to history. Long thought to be extinct, their legacy was one of manipulation and destruction. The galaxy had learned little about them, but Rail's few encounters with ancient records painted a chilling picture. The Zhyrith were known for their ability to manipulate lesser species, bending them to their will and orchestrating chaos from the shadows. Could it be that the Black Tide had been their puppet all along? As the fleet moved into position, Rail knew time was running out. Earth's forces were taking heavy losses, and every moment spent questioning the motives of their enemies was another moment the Black Tide could use to their advantage. She had to act now. The Liberty's hope dropped out of warp, positioning itself just outside the Black Tide warship's perimeter. The boarding team was ready, a mix of Earth's elite soldiers and engineers, specially trained for operations in hostile environments. Rail activated the comms again. "Admiral, we're boarding now. I'll personally lead the mission." "Understood," Orin replied, "but be careful. If the Zhyrith are involved, this is far more dangerous than you realize. Don't underestimate them." Rail's expression hardened. "We won't fail." With that, the boarding team teleported aboard the warship, materializing inside a dark, sprawling hangar filled with Black Tide soldiers. Rail's tactical team moved with precision, taking down the enemy with silent efficiency. As they advanced through the corridors, Rail could feel the weight of her suspicions growing heavier. The design of the ship felt wrong, too clean, too precise. It was as if it had been built with an alien hand. They reached the central command room, a massive space filled with screens and control panels, all operating with strange symbols Rail couldn't decipher. Standing at the helm was a figure, cloaked in black armor, their face hidden in shadow. The figure's presence was cold, calculating, and eerily familiar. "Welcome, Ambassador Juno," the figure's voice boomed, reverberating through the room. It was calm, detached, as though they had been expecting this moment. "You've done well to come this far, but you will not leave alive." Rail's heart skipped a beat. The voice, the presence, it was unmistakable. You're Zyrith." The figure stepped forward, revealing themselves to be tall, lithe, and unnervingly humanoid, with piercing red eyes glowing under the dark helm. "Indeed, I am, and soon you will understand the futility of your resistance." Rail's hand instinctively went to her sidearm, but before she could react, the ship's systems powered up, and alarms began blaring. The Zyrith's trap had been set. The warship's core was overheating, and it was about to self-destruct, taking the entire fleet with it. The figure laughed, the sound cold and haunting. "You are too late, Ambassador. Your galaxy will burn, and humanity's hope will be nothing more than a whisper in the dark." Rail's pulse quickened. They had to stop the self-destruction, or Earth would lose everything. With no time to waste, Rail rallied her team. "We don't leave until we stop this." And so, with the fate of Earth and the galaxy hanging in the balance, Rail raced against time, knowing that every second could be their last. Rail's breath came in sharp, controlled bursts as she and her team sprinted through the corridors of the Black Tide warship, the sound of their boots echoing off the cold, metallic walls. The Zyrith leader's laughter still rang in her ears, a cruel reminder of how close they were to losing everything. The self-destruct sequence was already well underway, counting down with relentless precision. They had minutes, maybe less, before the warship tore itself apart, taking Earth's fleet with it. "Status on the self-destruct system," Rail demanded, her voice tight with urgency, as she activated her wrist console. "Tracking the countdown now, ma'am," Lieutenant Tessa's voice crackled over her comm. "We've got 6 minutes before detonation. We're locked out of most systems, but there's a manual override near the reactor core. If we can get there, we might have a chance." Rail cursed under her breath. The reactor core was on the other side of the ship, heavily fortified and crawling with Black Tide soldiers. Getting there in time would be a miracle, if they didn't hit another trap along the way. "Keep moving," Rail shouted, her team following her through the maze of winding hallways. The black armor of the Zyrith leader seemed to haunt her thoughts, reminding her of just how deadly their enemies were. The warship itself felt alive, every flicker of the lights and hum of the engines sending a pulse of malevolent energy through the air. They reached a checkpoint, but their way was blocked by a squad of heavily armed Black Tide soldiers, their crimson armor standing out against the ship's otherwise shadowy interior. The soldiers raised their weapons without hesitation, but Rail and her team were faster. The air filled with the sound of rapid-fire energy blasts as both sides exchanged gunfire. Rail ducked behind a column, firing a precise shot that took down one of the soldiers. The others didn't hesitate to return fire, and Rail knew that they had no time to waste. The self-destruct countdown was still ticking, and every delay was a risk they couldn't afford. "Flank them," Rail barked. Her team moved in perfect unison, taking up positions on both sides of the hallway. A barrage of explosives sent the Black Tide soldiers scrambling for cover, but they were outmatched. The soldiers fell quickly, their resistance futile against Earth's elite forces. Once the last of the soldiers was neutralized, Rail didn't pause to catch her breath. She motioned for her team to advance. To the reactor core, now. As they pressed on, Rail's mind raced. The Zyrith had made their move. They had turned the Black Tide into an instrument of destruction, but the true purpose behind the attack remained unclear. What were the Zyrith really after? Why were they choosing to target Earth now, at the height of the galaxy's turmoil? Rail didn't have answers, but she didn't need them, not yet. She only needed to survive long enough to stop this madness. The reactor core was only 2 levels down, but as they neared it, they encountered more resistance. This time, it wasn't just Black Tide soldiers. The Gyrith had left behind automated sentinels, machines of war designed to neutralize any intruder. They moved with deadly precision, their sensors scanning for heat signatures and movement. The team had no choice but to engage. Rail's heart hammered in her chest as the sentinels activated, their weapons blazing. "Take cover," she shouted, ducking behind a metal wall as bolts of energy shot past her. The air buzzed with tension as her team returned fire, but the sentinels seemed to anticipate every move they made. "We need a plan," shouted Sergeant Kellen, one of her most trusted officers. "We can't hold them off much longer." Rail's mind raced. They needed to disable the sentinels, but how? Their energy shields were too strong for normal weapons. A thought struck her. "Kellen, cover me. I'll take them from behind." Rail sprinted forward, weaving between the automated sentinels, avoiding their deadly shots by inches. She reached a nearby maintenance hatch, her fingers flying across the controls to access the ship's internal systems. The hatch slid open, revealing a maintenance tunnel running beneath the sentinels. "Go, go, go!" she shouted to her team, who followed her into the tunnel. Rail kept moving, her pulse thundering in her ears. She reached another junction, where the power conduits ran directly to the sentinels' control systems. A few quick modifications to the circuitry, and she was able to disable their power grid, rendering the sentinels powerless. "Sentinels down," Rail called over her comms. "We've got 5 minutes. Move." They wasted no time. Rail's team rushed to the reactor core's access point. But as they arrived, they were met with yet another obstacle, a reinforced security door sealed tight. "We don't have time for this," Rail snapped, pulling out her explosive charges. She planted them quickly, the countdown ticking in the background. They moved away just as the charges detonated, blasting the door open with a deafening roar. Rail stepped through the smoke, her eyes fixed on the massive reactor core ahead. The countdown had only a minute left, and the core was unstable. But the manual override was within reach. "Everyone, get to the control panel," Rail ordered, sprinting to the terminal. As her hands flew over the keys, a sickening realization hit her. This wasn't going to be as simple as pulling a lever. The Gyrith had set this up to be far more complex. The countdown wasn't just a simple self-destruct, it was a trap, one that would send a signal to all Black Tide fleets in the system. They were about to broadcast Earth's coordinates to a far larger enemy force. Rail's stomach dropped. She had to stop the countdown, and fast. The galaxy's fate depended on it. Rail's fingers flew across the control panel, trying to decipher the alien interface before her. The countdown continued to tick down with brutal efficiency, the flashing red numbers mocking her every second that passed. She could feel the pressure of time closing in, but the overwhelming complexity of the system was paralyzing. Each key she pressed seemed to trigger another layer of security, a new defense that kept the self-destruct countdown ticking forward. The reactor core ahead of her hummed ominously, its energy surging through the warship. There was no time to waste, no room for error. The Gyrith had designed this system with a twisted precision, making sure that failure meant not just destruction of the warship, but the exposure of Earth's position to a much larger, far more dangerous enemy fleet that lay in wait just outside the system. "We've got 4 minutes." Lieutenant Tessa's voice crackled over the comms, sharp with panic. "Rail, we can't disable the countdown manually without triggering a secondary security lockdown. We need to figure out another way." Rail's mind raced. The Gyrith had anticipated resistance. This wasn't just a fail-safe, it was a deliberate trap. But the real question was, who were they trying to lure? The Black Tide was merely a distraction. Rail had seen it all along, and now the pieces were falling into place. The Gyrith weren't just trying to destroy Earth, they were setting up a larger game. They were provoking something much worse. "Can you access the ship's auxiliary systems?" Rail asked, trying to hold her composure. The panic in her chest was suffocating, but she forced it down. This wasn't the time for hesitation. Tessa's voice came through again. "I've got a backdoor into their navigation systems, but the protocol is messy. I'll need a minute to bypass the encryption." "Do it. We need to stop the countdown and send a signal out, fast. If the Gyrith are calling in reinforcements, we need to get the message to Earth's fleet now." Rail's hand hovered over the control panel, and for a split second, she thought she saw the words "Override Protocol" flash on the screen. She hesitated, just long enough for the Gyrith's next line of defense to activate. The console flashed red as alarms blared, and the screen showed a massive explosion of energy in the reactor core. "Rail," Sergeant Kellen shouted, her voice filled with disbelief. "The reactor's going critical. If we don't stop this now, we'll have nothing left to save." Rail's heart dropped. She had to think faster, act quicker. If the reactor detonated now, it would wipe out everything within a 100-mile radius, possibly even Earth itself. The Gyrith had programmed the self-destruct to ensure that there would be no survivors. "Wait," Rail muttered to herself, realizing something. The system wasn't just a countdown, it was a message encoded in the final seconds. It wasn't just a detonation. It was a transmission, a call to arms, a signal that would send the galaxy's most powerful fleets to Earth's doorstep. She couldn't let them reach Earth. She turned back to the control panel. "Forget disabling the countdown. We need to block the transmission. If we can do that, we stop the Gyrith from sending out the signal. We'll have a chance." Lieutenant Tessa's voice was a lifeline. "I can do that. I'll override the transmission system and jam the signal. Just buy me time." Rail's mind cleared, her resolve hardening. She quickly assessed the situation. The reactor was the key to everything, the heart of the ship, where all systems converged. It wasn't just about stopping the explosion. It was about ensuring that no message escaped this ship. The seconds felt like hours as the team began to work in unison, their movements more urgent now. Rail looked up, her eyes scanning the walls around her. The team was already taking positions, setting up defenses in case more black tide reinforcements arrived. The Gyrith's trap was closing in around them, but they weren't finished yet. The tension was palpable. The hum of the reactor grew louder as the core reached critical levels. Rail's fingers danced over the console, overriding the final barriers blocking Tessa's access to the ship's transmission systems. "Done!" Tessa exclaimed. "I've locked down the transmission. No message is going anywhere. But we still have to disable the self-destruct before we get vaporized in the process." Rail didn't waste a second. She turned to the core's access panel, bypassing the last encryption layer. Her heart raced as the control panel blinked in a complex sequence of numbers and symbols, but she was too focused to back down. She couldn't fail now. The countdown reached its final 30 seconds. Rail's breath was ragged as she worked. Every second that passed brought them closer to annihilation, and she could almost hear the distant rumble of enemy ships closing in, the ominous shadow of the Gyrith fleet waiting for the signal to strike. Then, in the final moments, the screen blinked green. "I've done it," Rail muttered, disbelief flooding her as she stared at the newly stable reactor readings. "We stopped the countdown." The room fell into a stunned silence as the alarm stopped blaring, and the imminent destruction of the Liberty's hope was averted. But even as Rail allowed herself a brief moment of relief, she knew that this was only the beginning. The Gyrith's true plan was still unfolding, and Earth's fight for survival had only just begun. "We're not done yet," Rail said, her voice steely with resolve. "Get to the bridge. We've got a galaxy to save." And with that, they began their final push to find the heart of the Gyrith conspiracy before the real storm hit. Rail's pulse hammered in her ears as she led her team through the ship's corridors, now eerily quiet. The sound of their boots was muted against the smooth metal flooring, but the weight of the situation pressed down on them all. The Liberty's hope, the last bastion of Earth's defense, was still intact, but Rail knew this reprieve was only temporary. The Gyrith had never been interested in simple destruction. They had played a much deeper game, one that was only beginning to unfold. Rail, Tessa's voice came through the comms, cutting through her thoughts. I've cracked the navigation logs. The Gyrith fleet is already moving toward Earth's solar system. They've already transmitted our coordinates to a fleet of ships, too many to count. It's an invasion. Rail clenched her jaw. It was as she feared. The Gyrith had only used the Liberty's hope as bait. They had known that Earth's fleet would come rushing to the rescue, and when the Liberty's hope was destroyed, the signal would go out, leading Earth's defenses straight into the hands of the real enemy. Can you pinpoint the fleet's location? Rail asked, her eyes narrowing as she plotted their next steps. They're not far, Tessa replied. We've got maybe 12 hours before they reach Earth, but there's a bigger problem. The Gyrith are using a quantum cloaking field to hide their numbers. I can't give an exact count, but from the patterns I'm seeing, we're looking at a fleet of at least 20 ships. Rail exhaled sharply. 20 ships, each one bristling with weapons far more advanced than anything Earth had. If they couldn't stop this, Earth would be defenseless. She could already feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. We need to warn Earth, now, Rail said, her voice firm. Tell Command to prepare for an emergency strike. I'll contact the fleet, and we'll launch a counterattack. You'll need to take the Liberty's Hope to the edge of the system, Tessa said. It's the only ship fast enough to get there before the fleet does. But we're running low on fuel and supplies. If we engage the Gyrith now, we might not make it back. Rail didn't hesitate. We'll make it back. Earth needs us. The fleet needs us. We're Earth's last hope. Without waiting for a response, Rail moved toward the command center. As they navigated through the ship, her thoughts raced. This wasn't just a battle for survival, it was a fight for Earth's future. If the Gyrith succeeded in their invasion, Earth would be subjugated. And if the Gyrith were allied with the darker forces lurking in the galaxy, things could spiral out of control in ways Rail couldn't even begin to imagine. The command center came into view, its reinforced doors opening automatically as they approached. Rail stepped in, her eyes immediately locking onto the holographic map of the solar system that lit up before her. A dozen blinking red dots hovered near Earth, each one representing an enemy vessel. We need to move, Rail said, her voice steady as she activated the communications array. I'm sending out a Priority 1 message to Earth Command. Get ready for a preemptive strike. We can't wait any longer. As Rail prepared to send the message, a sudden jolt ran through the ship. The lights flickered, and the hum of the Liberty's Hope's engines seemed to change pitch. Tessa's voice crackled in her ear again, this time with a note of urgency. Rail, we've got a problem. The Gyrith have activated a destabilizing field. The quantum cloaking is affecting our sensors. I can't get an accurate lock on the enemy fleet anymore. They could be anywhere. Rail cursed under her breath. The Gyrith weren't just trying to hide their numbers. They were scrambling Earth's ability to counterattack. If they couldn't track the fleet's position, they wouldn't be able to intercept it in time. We need to take a risk, Rail said, her eyes hardening. Get me to the main engine room. We're going to override their cloaking field from the inside. Tessa didn't respond immediately, but Rail could hear the quiet hum of her team moving into position, preparing for what would come next. Understood. You'll need to reach the secondary reactor, Tessa said after a pause. There's an access point there that should give you a direct link to the ship's energy grid. It's risky, but it might give us the edge we need. Rail nodded, her mind already calculating their next moves. Then we'll make it work. The team quickly moved through the lower levels of the Liberty's Hope, their steps quick and precise. Rael's mind, however, was elsewhere. The Gyrith's deception was far more intricate than she had anticipated, and now the full scale of their plan was beginning to take shape. They weren't just attacking Earth. They were setting the stage for something far more dangerous, an all-out war for control of the galaxy. And Rael knew, deep down, that this wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a battle for everything that Earth had built. They reached the secondary reactor room, and Rael immediately set to work, her hands moving deftly across the console. The lights above them flickered again, and a cold dread crept over her. The Gyrith were closing in, and Earth's fleet was still too far out to stop them. Her fingers hovered over the override switch. If she activated the sequence, they would disable the cloaking field, but doing so would also expose them to the enemy. Every second was a gamble, every move a risk. The decision was clear. "Do it," Rael said, her voice calm, even though her heart raced in her chest. Tessa didn't hesitate. The switch was flipped. The room shook as the ship's systems powered down, and Rael knew, in that instant, the hunt was on. The Gyrith would know they were coming, but now Earth's fleet would have a fighting chance. The war had only just begun. The Liberty's Hope shuddered violently as the last of the cloaking field dissipated, and Rael felt a strange weight lift from her shoulders. The ship's internal systems were no longer scrambling their sensors, and for the first time since the Gyrith's interference began, she could see clearly. The map of the solar system, once obscured by the Gyrith's quantum distortion, was now fully visible. Dozens of enemy ships, each one looming ominously near Earth's orbit, began to blink on the display. The Gyrith fleet had split into multiple factions, each with its own goal. Some were positioning themselves to attack Earth directly, while others were coordinating with fleets further into the galaxy. Rael's heart raced as she realized that this was no ordinary invasion. It was the beginning of something much worse, a multi-front assault that could destabilize the entire galaxy. "Rael, we've got incoming." Tessa's voice echoed in her ear, sharp and panicked. "The Gyrith are shifting course. They're launching coordinated attacks from multiple positions. If we don't stop them now, Earth's defenses won't hold." Rael's mind raced. The Liberty's Hope was the fastest ship in Earth's fleet, but it was still just one vessel against overwhelming odds. The Gyrith ships were far superior in both firepower and sheer numbers. If they engaged directly, they would be outgunned. "We need to outsmart them," Rael said through gritted teeth. "Get me a direct line to Earth Command. We need to strike first, hit them where they least expect it. I'll give them a decoy." The command center's communications console flickered as Tessa worked quickly. "I'm patching you through, Rael. Earth Command is waiting for your report." The connection buzzed briefly before Rael's voice broke through the static, firm and commanding. "This is Captain Rael of the Liberty's Hope. We've disabled the Gyrith's cloaking field. They're coming for Earth, fast, and they've got a much larger fleet than we anticipated. We need to launch a preemptive strike, hit them hard before they can regroup." A voice crackled through the comms, leaden with urgency. "Rael, do you have their exact position? We need to move fast, but we can't afford to act blindly. The enemy is already within range of our defenses." Rael's eyes narrowed as she studied the fleet's movements on the display. The Gyrith's strategy was clear now. They were using speed and precision to overwhelm Earth's defenses, forcing Earth's fleet into a defensive posture. But if they could disrupt that strategy, they might have a chance. "I've pinpointed their main command ship," Rael said, eyes locking onto a singular, colossal vessel at the center of the fleet. "We need to target their flagship. If we destroy it, the rest of their forces will scatter. I'll lead a small strike team to cripple their navigation systems. Meanwhile, Earth Command should focus on hitting their secondary vessels." A brief pause followed, and then the voice from Earth Command responded. "Understood. We'll adjust our strategy accordingly. The Liberty's Hope is our best asset, but you need to make it count." Rail nodded, determination flooding her veins. We will. Prepare the fleet for immediate deployment. I'm sending the coordinates now. We won't let them get to Earth. As the transmission ended, Rail turned to her crew, her expression unwavering. Prepare for combat. Tessa, start plotting the fastest trajectory to the flagship. I want us there as quickly as possible. Tessa nodded, already tapping commands into the console. Engines are primed, Captain, but the Gyrith are adapting quickly. We'll be under heavy fire the moment we're detected. Rail looked around at her team. The faces of her officers were determined, but the weight of the task ahead hung heavily in the air. They were about to launch a dangerous mission, one that could end in their deaths. But if they failed, Earth would fall. The ship's engines roared to life, and the entire vessel lurched forward as it accelerated toward the heart of the enemy fleet. The sensors picked up a barrage of incoming fire, the first waves of Gyrith ships locking onto their position. Brace for impact, Rail ordered, gripping the armrest of her chair as the ship rocked with a series of violent jolts. The lights flickered, but the Liberty's Hope held steady. Rail's eyes remained fixed on the viewport, watching as enemy ships closed in. They were faster than anything Earth had ever seen, but Rail wasn't going to give them the chance to overwhelm her. Deploy decoys, she ordered. Scatter the drones. We need to draw their fire. A series of small ships, loaded with high-tech decoy systems, shot out from the Liberty's Hope, creating a web of confusion among the approaching enemy vessels. The Gyrith took the bait, diverting part of their fire to the drones, which bought them precious seconds. Captain, we're entering the flagship's firing range, Tessa warned. They've already targeted us. Rail's eyes flicked to the tactical display, noting the trajectory of the enemy flagship's weapons. It was going to be a direct shot. Hold steady, Rail muttered under her breath. We're not running this time. The Liberty's Hope surged forward, hurtling through the chaos of incoming fire and explosions. The Gyrith flagship loomed ahead, its massive silhouette now filling the view. Rail's heart raced in sync with the countdown to impact. Now, she shouted. The ship's weapon systems blazed to life, unleashing a barrage of missiles and energy blasts aimed directly at the flagship's vulnerable point, its command center. A massive explosion erupted as the first missile hit its mark, sending shockwaves through the fleet. Rail grinned, but the battle was far from over. The Liberty's Hope was in the thick of it now, surrounded by the full might of the Gyrith fleet. She could feel the storm closing in, but it wasn't over yet, not while Earth still had a chance to fight. Get ready, Rail said to her crew. This is just the beginning. The explosion rocked the Liberty's Hope, and Rail's grip tightened on the console as the ship was buffeted by shockwaves. The flagship of the Gyrith fleet had taken a hit, but it wasn't down, not yet. The massive vessel began to retaliate, its weapons opening fire with devastating precision, targeting the Liberty's Hope with overwhelming force. The crew braced for impact, the ship's shields flickering dangerously under the assault. Captain, shields are failing. Tessa's voice crackled through the comms, urgent and strained. We're taking too much fire. We need to get out of here. Rail's mind raced as she analyzed their situation. The Gyrith flagship had already shifted its focus, firing relentlessly to stop them from getting any closer. They were caught in a deadly game of cat and mouse, and every moment they stayed in range made them more vulnerable. Divert power to the aft shields, Rail barked. Prepare evasive maneuvers, full thrusters. We need to break their line of fire. The Liberty's Hope groaned as its engines roared to life. The ship jolted as it twisted and turned, diving through the enemy's fire. Explosions erupted in the distance as the decoy drones continued to create distractions, buying them the time they needed to close the distance. But the Gyrith flagship wasn't their only threat. The rest of the enemy fleet had regrouped, converging on their position. The remaining ships swarmed around them like hungry predators, eager to finish the job. We can't keep this up, Tessa said, her voice strained. "The flagship is repairing itself faster than we anticipated. We're running out of time." Rael's eyes narrowed as she analyzed the battlefield. The Gyrith were too numerous, too strong, but she knew one thing with certainty. Earth's survival wasn't about brute force, it was about strategy. They couldn't win by trying to overpower the enemy. They had to outsmart them, make them doubt themselves, break their resolve. She turned to Tessa. "Is there any way to use their own ships against them? A weakness we can exploit?" Tessa hesitated for a split second, then her eyes widened as she tapped into the ship's systems. "There's a comm relay station on the flagship. If we can hack into their communication network, we could create confusion among their fleet, possibly even cause them to turn on each other. But it's risky. They'll be aware the moment we start breaching their systems." Rael nodded, determination hardening her resolve. "Then we don't give them the chance to stop us. We'll go in, full speed. You'll have one shot to get it done. We'll keep them occupied while you do it." "Understood," Tessa replied, a flicker of confidence in her eyes, despite the dire circumstances. Rael quickly gave the order, and the Liberty's Hope surged forward, darting between the wreckage of destroyed Gyrith drones and incoming fire. The flagship loomed ahead, its dark silhouette unmistakable even through the chaos of the battle. "Ready, Captain," Tessa called from her station, her voice steady despite the pressure. "Do it," Rael ordered. The Liberty's Hope rocketed toward the flagship, weaving through the enemy ships as they retaliated with everything they had. The Liberty's Hope took a barrage of hits, but the shields held long enough for them to reach the critical point. Just as they were about to breach the flagship's outer defenses, Rael slammed her fist on the console. "Deploy the EMP," she commanded. The electromagnetic pulse shot out from the ship, hitting the flagship directly. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, everything went dark. The Liberty's Hope hung in the void, a lone predator poised for the kill. Then the enemy fleet faltered. Rael watched as Gyrith ships slowed, their systems short-circuited by the EMP blast. The flagship's weapons went silent. Communication channels buzzed with confusion as the fleet's coordination collapsed. "Tessa now," Rael shouted. Tessa was already at the console, fingers flying over the controls. Her face was tense, sweat beading on her forehead, but her focus was unwavering. A few seconds later, she punched in the final command. The comm relay was hacked. The flagship's internal network was flooded with false orders, causing Gyrith ships to fire on each other, ships to change course, and confusion to spread like wildfire. The once pristine coordination of the Gyrith fleet dissolved into chaos. Rael smiled grimly. It wasn't a perfect victory, but it was enough. "We have a window," Rael yelled, her voice sharp and commanding. "Full power to the forward cannons. Let's finish this." The Liberty's Hope pivoted sharply, its weapons priming as it locked onto the flagship. A salvo of concentrated fire erupted from their weapons, slamming into the flagship's hull with devastating force. This time, the flagship didn't recover. Its engines exploded in a massive flash of light, sending debris scattering through space. "Direct hit," Tessa cried out, exhilaration and relief in her voice. "The flagship is down." The rest of the Gyrith fleet was in disarray. Many of their ships had already turned on each other, a few retreating, while others were caught in a cycle of panic and confusion. Earth's fleet, led by Rael's decoy strike, began to regroup, moving into position to press their advantage. Rael leaned back in her chair, exhausted but triumphant. "It's over. Earth's safe. For now." But Rael knew this victory, though hard-won, was just the beginning. The Gyrith would return, stronger, angrier. The galaxy was far from secure, and Earth, despite all the strength it had shown, would need every ally, every hand willing to fight, to survive the war that was still unfolding. As the Liberty's Hope sailed through the wreckage, Rael looked to the stars ahead. The battle for Earth was over, but the fight for the galaxy, that was just beginning.